Hey there, everybody! Seth here! I, the Caligula Kingpin, have returned with the long-awaited Caligula 2 playable boss rankings! After many months. Oh, I just realized this is the first strictly Caligula video I'm actually speaking in. Oh boy. Off topic. I am so sorry for the wait. Some procrastination and just trying to take care of other things first aside, you will not believe how horrible the process of making this has been. Like, good God, I have learned quite a lot about the game and the boss as a whole, and, well, a lot of other stuff. Just a lot of newfound knowledge kept popping up over and over again that made me have to redo everything about 5 times. I would love to rant about just how awful the process was, but in the interest of not making this too long, I'll save that for a pinned comment. If I see the video duration getting a bit lengthy, you might have to make this a 2-parter. But that aside, after a huge excessive amount of testing and retesting, I'm here to inform the 5 people who maybe actually wondered about it, which bosses are actually the best to use in your team. I was curious myself beyond just my showcase as to which ones were actually the best overall, and we will find out that answer today. But before we get into the actual rankings, I should of course go over the rules and test conditions that I was operating by here. Number 1, all enemies and bosses are set to level 200 to eliminate any level gap fuckery and to compare them to the strongest enemies possible. We are also of course using the post-game rematch versions of the bosses so they have the best hidden gear equipped. 2, stats have been modified so that every boss has increased attack power by the same amount as Kobudo's strongest Stigma equip. Also, Wicked has less of a defense boost than everyone else for some stupid fucking reason, so I changed that to be the same as well. Everything else is kept the same. The normal stats for bosses are pretty bad. Like, worse than normal party members, even. It was one of the major problems while making this, but since I found a way to fix it, it's fortunately a non-issue here. 3! Bosses have no outside help from MC or any other normal party member and must clear things on their own. Since the game won't function without MC in your team, I always move to kill them off in the battle as quick as possible. And lastly, 4! Summons and helper enemies that spawn in with the bosses are allowed and counted toward the boss's kit. Frankly, if you removed this clause, you'd get a much different list, but for the sake of being a complete evaluation, removing summons from a boss like Kudon would be very unfair to her.
Not that she's great even with the summons.
That said, having more than one set of summoned enemies is banned, as obviously summoning 20 plus Digiheads will probably win the fight pretty handily. That about covers the rules. As for the test itself, it's rather quite simple, really. I picked a specific group of 3 Digiheads squatting out the Tower of Epimetheus and timed how fast each boss could kill them. With how many times and through how many circumstances I've done this, I can say the results are quite conclusive. I chose 3 enemies as 1v1ing some random bastard wasn't going to give us much data at all, and killing a group is much more impressive. Tests against other bosses weren't done, but if enough of you like, I can make that a separate video. Reason for that being, boss versus boss fights have a lot of their own issues. I found that there is at least one boss that heavily benefits from this rule set, but oh well, some of the other cheater advantages on display here are way less fair to everyone else. There's no real way to know for sure what the best and fairest method is, but I found this gave most people a fair shot on a base level, independent from their specifics. If this gets popular enough and you want me to run pure solo tests instead, I can do that too, I guess, maybe. Considering some modifications are made to the boss stat lines for this quote-unquote true test, I'll be putting my old list at the end of the video of unmodded stat rankings to those curious as to what would more accurately represent the real experience in-game. But for now, without further delay, on to the results of this hellish video idea of mine! Starting, of course, with the bottom of the barrel, we have our number 10 spot. I can guarantee nobody is expecting who you're about to see in dead last. Honestly, go ahead, place your bets now. A decent amount has changed since I did my initial showcases of all the musicians, but even still, is it Kudon? Pandora? Mu-kun? None of the fucking above, shockingly. Technically. But we'll get into that later. The irrefutably worst playable musician goes to Kranke. Yep! Bet you didn't see that coming! But Seth, what? How? Why? Yeah, I know, I was beyond amazed too. But here's the evaluation. Kranke, despite her absurdly long attack rushes, defense debuffs, and a rampaging wheelchair helping her, took 10 minutes to kill 3 enemies! Let's talk about her good qualities first. She has her Izuru-esque skill combo chains that are very flashy, her ultimates are relatively fast and inflict defense debuffs. I even know what her Berserk buff does now. It actually applies a number of buffs onto her, but because they wear off before she typically can recover from her attacks, they're basically unnoticeable. The buffs include 1 stack of cast time, 3 stacks of HP drain, 3 stacks of extra attack level, and 3 stacks of what is either taking damage increasing her attack or doing damage increasing her attack. It's hard to tell. The wheelchair is a risk machine and basically guarantees a risk break on anything it spam charges at. And that's about it, actually. As for where she falls short, God, where do I even start? Okay, so the chair being a risk machine is about the only useful thing it has going for it. Sure, it can wild charge its way around, probably knocking Digiheads out of the way and stun-locking them, but the damage off this is abysmal, and can even fuck up Kranke's combos if used without care. This is assuming as well that the rushes even go off, as the chair has very low defense level and is very easily staggered or knocked out of these attacks. Even worse, it is incredibly frail and very prone to dying. In just about every run I've done with Kranke on this, the chair has died around halfway through the battle, which makes things much harder for her. Speaking of abysmal damage, this is shockingly a trait shared by Maria herself. How? I have zero idea. Somehow, even after quote-unquote fixing things, her DPS is still absolutely pathetic, even on risk-broken targets. This is made even worse by 99% of her moveset being deplorably slow. Her ultimates and go away have acceptable startup time, but the recover on everything besides go away is absurd. This is made even worse by her accuracy being possibly worse than Kobudo's with no buffs to compensate for it. And this is made even worse by the fact that even if you do get hit, her best attacks are subject to having extremely awful dead zones that cause them to whiff and not continue chaining. And even if they maybe do hit, the requirements for some chains to go off, like from I hate you, can sometimes just be tanked, causing them to not trigger. And them not triggering leaves you with that absolutely deplorable recovery time where she will inevitably get the shit beaten out of her before you can make another move. The life drain from Berserk is hardly noticeable, which leaves her without any reliable healing either, making her the most likely of any boss to actually be killed in battle. It breaks my heart a bit, but it's undeniable that Kranke is literally bad at everything. And this is after I fixed her attack stat! She's even worse to use in the base game! Watching her maul shit will never not be cool, but god damn, it's so sad to see her get ripped off like this. Sorry, Maria. Moving up to the number 9 spot, we have a bit of a complicated case. I'll explain it as we go, but our next contender here is, in fact, Kudon. Yeah, this is more in line with what you were expecting, I'm sure. You see, Kudon's a bit of a weird case, as she technically has 2 different times to account for. The first time being 8 minutes and 42 seconds, and the other time being 5 minutes and 25 seconds? The fuck? Well, let me explain. Kudon's effectiveness greatly differs based on one factor, and one factor alone: how you work her digiheads. By that I mean whether you summon AI-controlled ones, at least in a theoretical world where it's going to crash the game after the fight, or if you opt to manually add 2 of them into your party and control them directly. Kudon with manually controlled digiheads is almost borderline privilege. At least her post-game rematch version is. The rematch variant of Kudon has 3 different digihead variants she summons, and shockingly 2 of these 3 are actually super good. One of these being able to inflict triple poison and bleed, and the other being a regenerating healer and buff user that can cast Wonder Force, Healing Aura, and Death Metal, as well as Clearance Field for shaking off pesky debuffs from your entire team. I've already expressed the horror of Kudon in her video. Her stats, even after buffs, moveset, and everything else is absolutely abysmal. She is at least one of the only 2 bosses in the game with a melee counter skill in the form of Trick Shot, though that's not doing her many favors. The rest of her actual attacking moves are slow, weak, do virtually nothing, or cause her to kill herself. But she can be carried hard by her digiheads. Without them, she is undoubtedly bottom 1, but their mere existence means that she at least has to go above Kranke. That said, because of Kudon herself being borderline useless on her own, and CPU digiheads being a crapshoot and legitimately getting the second worst time of all these, I think we can all agree she deserves the number 9 spot here. I'm beyond impressed she managed to not fall into dead last, and honestly, she really did deserve a more robust boss design. Eighth place is, from what I know, an unironic fan favorite and probably an accurate representation of me after I turned 25 this year, Pink Astronaut Man himself, Mu-kun. Clocking in a clear time of 8 minutes and 16 seconds, he just barely scrapes by Kudon to be 3rd from last place. How the hell did this motherfucker with the worst helpers in the game weasel himself here? Well, it certainly wasn't Mr. Bear getting clocked across the fucking field for the 20th time. 2 words! Cosmic Cute Showtime. Despite his borderline anti-synergy with everything and everyone, Mu-kun's moves all having the same startup time means there is no reason not to go balls to the wall with it. Especially when, unlike his boss fight, you don't need to rack up 3 buffs to even use it in the first place.
Do not fucking do that, by the way. If you play the same way his AI does, it easily makes him even worse than Kudon. Not that you can even technically do that, since the only helpers that can properly buff him are the summoned ones.
Though in the case of focusing on a single target, Avant-Garde Teddy may be a better choice due to the defense debuff it inflicts. That instance aside though, quote-unquote optimal Mu-kun is literally just spamming the fuck out of Cosmic Cute Showtime. Using any other move is literally trolling, seeing as the rest of his moves consist of slow, bad laser, equally slow, possibly worse laser, a worse version of Cosmic Cute Showtime, and a resummon. Another notable positive he has going for him, though, is that due to the dancing counting as being an active skill and being instant, he will almost never be getting staggered or flung around out of an attack unless it's during recovery. His helpers, while frail, weak, and complete garbage, are capable of at least putting up some accuracy debuffs to inflate your survivability by having the enemy more or less unable to ever hit you. Cosmic Cute Showtime is an absolute beast of a move and contender for best boss ultimate in the game. The decent damage, field-wide range, and triple debuff to attack, accuracy, and evasion is too good to be ignored. Not only making enemies less likely to hit you, but decreasing the damage they inflict when they do, as well as raising the chance of being able to hit them back. On top of that, unlike numerous other boss skills in the game, it can critical hit, further increasing the effectiveness. It does have the complete asinine downside of purging every buff, not debuff, buff status from him after being used, but when you consider the fact that neither he or his helpers have any meaningful buff to give him, it's not a factor in this scenario. The fact he has a move like this and is still third from the bottom is truly a testament to how mediocre he is to use your team, though, which is horribly cruel, actually. You were an ass in the story, Inaga, but you certainly deserved a better hand in life. 7th place, where things are gonna start getting less predictable. How exciting! Sadly, this is not going to be a very good start for me, as the 7th place spot goes to none other than Bluffman. Chadman sitting outside the bottom 4 really is a damn bummer, since he's probably one of my favorite bosses to actually use. He was actually bottom 3, going off of actual base game stats, though, so the fact he squeezes out of there with stats more in line with a real party member makes me happy. In any case, Father of the Year 2021 is here to establish himself as the true master of the blade, clocking a time of 7 minutes and 43 seconds. His kit is overall quite good with some good tools other bosses lack. His Goshinkins are extremely good helpers, sporting a heal skill, Tailwind to buff the entire team's cast time, and a very fast, high attackable skill in Shield Breaker that also happens to be one of the few guard break skills in the game. Chadman is either average or good at just about everything you could ask for. His accuracy is acceptable, his damage is decent but not super outstanding. Full Moon and Funeral Flash are risk-building machines with a full Funeral Flash combo building about 3 full risk levels, and Earth deals some pretty stellar damage on risk-broken enemies. Funeral Flash even allows him to be one of the few bosses able to deal with level 200 Digiheads that regenerate health! And Full Moon being a counter skill allows him to block nasty moves such as ones that debuff and retaliate accordingly. Pretty much every move in his arsenal has a situation where it's applicable, and it really adds to his fun factor. But of course, if it was all this fine and dandy, he wouldn't be sitting in 7th place. So, what's the catch? Well, his first issue is the startup time on basically everything is probably the second worst of all the bosses. He desperately needs those Tailwind buffs on the Goshinkin. I would be a lying bastard if I said him with no cast buffs wasn't a miserable time, as it makes it extremely easy for enemies to stun lock him with flinches. Finding an opening in this situation can feel outright hopeless, and it really holds him back. A second problem is similar to Kranke, he can struggle pretty hard against enemies he doesn't have a good hit rate on. Third, just like Kudon and Mu-kun, he's unable to heal himself, which puts him on a timer by default. Fourth, he himself lacks a guard break skill, but so do most other bosses, and this is covered by the Goshinkins. As you can see, the Goshinkins very handily cover the majority of these, but the level of dependency is so high that if something does happen to them, you're in deep shit, since he has no means of resummoning them after they're killed. At least he has them to cover his weaknesses in the first place, though. Kranke would kill for her chair to have an accuracy debuff or something to help her out there. While it maybe could be argued that he could be below Mu-kun with no Goshinkins, I feel like even in that case, he's certainly a lot better than a solo Kudon. The Goshinkins are a part of his kit after all, though, as he does spawn into them, so I think counting them is completely fair. I, of course, can't leave things off without talking about Sacred Sword Sayako, though. This is another absolute beast of a boss ultimate. 10 hits, covers the full field, and like Cosmic Cute Showtime, can deal critical hits. This is balanced out by the fact that it is also probably the second slowest boss ultimate in the game, and the accuracy tends to be crap compared to the rest of his moves. Even with +3 cast time from the Goshinkins, you'll be dealing more damage going for funeral flashes and such than trying to bang on Sayako, unless it gets a bunch of crits. In my experience, focusing down one enemy at a time is the key to success with Fluffman, and I would call him one of the more skillful musicians to utilize. Bonus points to his voice lines being god tier. You'll always be Chad Man in my heart, Koichiro. Sixth place goes to my least favorite musician in the game. QP. Yes, QP is in fact mid. Personally, I think she's more bottom, but we're not ranking based on personality, and sadly you can't argue with statistics. A clear time of around 5 minutes. Slightly faster with controlled digiheads is similar to Kudon. I figure timing both would be the fairest way to go about this. Unlike Kudon, though, the times are not that different, so you could call her about the same regardless of the route you take. But Seth, you said she sucked! Yeah, and she still does suck in base game, and she's boring to use! Unfortunately, a more proper stat, that first one is less of the case. Anyway, might as well go over those digiheads first. Similarly to Kudon, she too actually has 3 different digihead variants, which explains why she has 3 different slave of lava skills. They each summon a different pair combination from that pool of 3. Also, like Kudon, I opted to use the more useful of the 2 while controlling them. 2 of them aren't too notable, but of course she just has to conveniently have 1 of them that's pretty good, carrying quite a few useful debuffing skills like Euphoria. QP herself sports only a slightly larger repertoire of skills than Kudon. They are, however, significantly better in literally every way imaginable besides accuracy. In fact, her damage output is downright disgusting due to the existence of her obnoxious gimmick state, Charm. Charm is fucking broken. The fact the method of applying it is a semi-fast attack that hits the whole field is already a horrendous war crime. Charm has 2 different effects, both of them unforgivably unbalanced depending on who it's applied to. On allies, it causes them to regenerate health over time. On enemies, it boosts the damage of seemingly any move that hits them. And this is not a small boost. The difference is insane. Charm makes Cocoa go from one of the shittier damage dealers to a buzzsaw. And this isn't counting the fact that when she uses her Slave of Love summon, she will triple attack buff the summoned Digiheads and anyone else that would be in your party. Fortunately, the attack buff isn't applied to her. Of course, on top of being strong, her attacks, as I mentioned, are fast as well. Coquettish Briefing is a vile ultimate attack that is so fast, even when hit by a -3 in cast time, it only becomes about as slow as a party member ultimate. And the worst part of this is, her single target attacks can crit on top of the charm boost. What does this mean? Well, Honeybee Sting is a stinger missile, and Killer Bee Crit is the equivalent of chucking the enemy into a fucking paper shredder. I call it Killer Bee Crit because of the fact that this move hitting about 8 to 9 fucking times, alongside a questionably high crit rate, all but guarantees you'll be getting at least 1 with this move. It's outright horrifying to watch! But where this disease really shines is recovery. QP is the definitive healer of the musicians. On top of chunking the health bars of any charmed enemy, her ultimate also heals her and her entire fucking team. Fortunately, the E-Girl Menace is not without fault though. As I mentioned, without Charm, her effectiveness is greatly reduced. Of course, this is mostly a non-issue due to how easy it is for her to apply due to Monomania hitting the entire field. Mostly! As it turns out, QP also has some pretty deplorable stats in the accuracy department. It's better than Kranke's, but not by much. Getting minced by even a single accuracy debuff can easily invalidate a large chunk of her threat to the enemy. And those aren't the only debuffs she hates. While Coquettish Briefing isn't too slow on -3 cast time, the rest of her moveset besides Honeybee Sting becomes borderline unusable. She also gets dumpstered by enemy barriers, and can also be ragdolled quite easily out of her attacks when they go active. That's honestly about it though for her downsides. This bitch is a war crime, and the best way to describe using her is she's essentially a fucking coin toss. She'll either completely decimate the enemy, or be relentlessly rolled and stifled by staggers and buffs. Fucking skanky ass QP. Well, alright then, with bottom 5 out of the way, we've reached the halfway mark. I think we'll pause for a bit here though. We can cover the top 5 in another video. Because this is nearly a 20-minute mark now. Don't worry, that one won't take several months to make. I have all the footage and stuff I need already for the rest of it. God, watch it somehow take a while still anyways. In any case, hopefully this information has been at least somewhat fascinating, since tragically, as much as I love this game, the stuff I make for it is bound not be seen by very many. But it is my duty, as the Caligula Kingpin, to provide as much to it in the community as I possibly can. Hopefully I'll be catching at least most of you in the second part covering the top 5 musicians, but for now, I'll see you later.